Whatever happened to the American experiment? The idea of an independent, self-sustaining, self-governing nation where you could have liberty and justice for all. That idea has almost disappeared from the earth. We've moved away from the vision of our founding fathers. Where do we go next? As we look at the cultural situation of America today, we have to examine the transition from where we once were to where we're going in a number of different areas. In the sources that you will see at the end of this video, I reference an article by Cal Thomas, a respected journalist with more than 50 years in the business, has written an article in World Magazine called Infamous Scribble. The title of the article comes from a comment that George Washington made in the early days of America. Washington had such a low view of journalists that he once referred to them as infamous scribblers. Thomas examines the state of modern journalism and talks about the abandonment of this idea of a free press, which is a check, the fourth estate we call it, a check that balances the other branches of government. His argument is that we are prone to tyranny in the days moving forward because a free press is no longer holding government's feet to the fire. It has become, in a sense, a branch of government with its own almost unlimited power. Ben Franklin had this to say among our founding fathers about the press. He said, "The press, unlike any other Republican institution, has a power that does not fall under any constitutional check. It is motivated to act viciously by its very principle, created to attack dogma, false knowledge, and political corruption, though in practice it is neither limited nor moderated by either its own idealism or by any institution. While the press claims to rule like a court, passing all things before its judgment, it may rule tyrannically because it is liberated from considerations of justice or precedent. Thus, unchecked, the press can subvert rational habits of mind among citizens and reverence for the law while flattering public resentments and antagonizing citizens' pride." Franklin was a prophet because that's exactly what's happened. The things that should build up a nation and make them strong are downplayed, even trivialized by the press, while the things that create outrage and stir up dissatisfaction are what leads the story in each 24-hour news cycle. It's not just the press. What about politics? A lot of people use the word communist nowadays, and it seems to be a little out of place because we've been told that communism is dead. In fact, there are only 5 nations on the earth that still practice a classical Karl Marx style communism. It's China, Vietnam, Cuba, Laos, and North Korea. Outside of those nations, we're told communism is not a threat. And yet, today, a kind of neo-Marxism in America has many university departments, schools of education, and social work held completely hostage. Charitable foundations are supportive of movements that are practical expressions of the underlying communist philosophy. Movements like Black Lives Matter and Antifa and other various ecological groups. The radical environmentalist movement, the climate change movement today, the green movement, if you will, is very much a new covering for the old communism of the 1960s and 70s. It is a powerful force designed to destabilize the nuclear family and break down the sex binary in service of the revolution. Now, it's true that the old economic aspects of communism really are practically dead. We were told that the workers would eventually throw off the shackles of their capitalist overlords. They would seize the means of production, and the revolution would be on as the elite few would then direct the establishment of the coming utopia. That's the communist ideal. As history has proven, though, capitalism didn't center all of its power in a core group of greedy owners that then oppressed the rest of the world. What happened instead was the wealth was spread around. Trade unions actually allowed skilled workers to become middle class and property owners. The workers never rose up to throw off their capitalist masters. They didn't seize the means of production. And they never put that select group of elite in charge of creating the utopia, because the reality is, history shows capitalism actually allowed billions of people around the world move out of abject poverty. So what is left of communism today that we need to consider? Well, what's left is the core philosophy of communism, which is what some writers have called the will to power. In other words, the basic flaw of communism is the desire for the few, the elite, to micromanage the lives of the many with some sort of nebulous goal that by doing so, the really wise and sophisticated among us will create a perfect society if the rest of us sort of lowly people will just bow down and let them be in charge. It is this will to power cloaked in the language of altruism or benefit that is most dangerous in our culture today. The progressive left is a dominant force that attempts to have absolute social control of every aspect of human life, and yet they always frame it in conversation as though it's for the good of the people. The oppressive laws and executive orders passed during the pandemic, they were for public health and safety. It's always wrapped in this kind of language. If you'll just sit down and be quiet and let us be in charge, you'll be happier. Sure, you're not going to own anything. Sure, you're going to have to live in a city where you can only travel 15 minutes from your home. Sure, you're going to have to eat bugs and artificial manufactured foods, but you're going to love it. Just trust us. It's for your good. Here's the problem. The Christian doctrine of original sin helps us understand just why that charismatic proposal is never going to work. The idea that a bunch of benevolently motivated elite will just somehow accrue all the power and they'll just take care of us like the little children that we are, and that they're above rebuke, they're above suspicion because they just want what's best for everybody. Folks, that's not the way human nature works. At the core of the far left movements that we see now taking over our institutions, they are indoctrinating our children, they are controlling major corporations, they are dominating our military, all with the same basic flaw that the few want power and control over the many. If you listen to what people say today about morality, we're being told that if we would just get on board with the direction of the culture, if we would just get on board with the LGBTQ agenda, if we would just sign off on the transgender ideas that are being presented, if we would just go with the flow, everything would be good. We're the problem. We're slowing down progress. Well, because we're slowing down progress, they've had to move to new strategies. Unable, even with all the control of institutions that they have, unable to fully transform America, we now find the Biden administration over the last year making a concerted effort to transfer breathtaking authority to international agencies like the World Health Organization, or WHO, as it's called. The proposal of the Biden administration includes that we would authorize WHO, the World Health Organization, to declare public health emergencies of international concern that are binding on participating nations. In other words, we would shift power from elected officials who answer to their constituents. That power would be handed over to international global institutions that would not be limited by the constitutional requirements of any particular nation. The U.S. has led this movement, which will fundamentally change the WHO by allowing, get this, by allowing the Director General of the World Health Organization to unilaterally, meaning not in consultation with anybody, to unilaterally declare an international public health crisis without consulting with participating countries. Another amendment that we have offered would establish a committee that would assess and issue fines for any nation that fails to comply. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, to start with, the World Health Organization didn't exactly distinguish itself during the pandemic. At first, they told us there was nothing to see, that we should just keep going on about our business. They accommodated China every step of the way. They refused to acknowledge where the COVID-19 virus came from. Eventually, they went from saying there's nothing to see, don't worry, you're fine, to imposing the most overreacting kinds of travel restrictions, including promoting what they called a stigma of discrimination that would minimize the consideration of any other theories or points of view. In other words, they became tyrants. And here we are trying to make that position official by ceding them authority to make decisions on our behalf. This proposal from the Biden administration would shift decision-making away from officials who have accountability to their citizens and put unelected global bureaucrats in charge of nations. They would have tremendous influence over countries. This power is based on what we saw come out of the pandemic, which you might call government by expert. I mean, all you have to do is look at the National Institute of Health and Dr. Anthony Fauci, if you remember that hero of the movement, to understand that giving these people more authority to extend their power over government simply because they're the so-called experts, that's not going to turn out well. Listen to this. The Centers for Disease Control has already declared racism a public health crisis in America, and the WHO already thinks that climate change is the single biggest threat facing humanity. If, in fact, climate change and racism are now public health and safety issues, they can impose any action they want to make sure that we do what they want under the guise of solving these endemic problems in human culture. Well, how do we approach this? Well, first of all, we have to understand exactly what's going on in human nature. In the book of Genesis, all the way back to Genesis chapter 4, that's the story of Cain and Abel and the first murder that takes place in human history. In Genesis chapter 4, verses 23 and 24, there's a descendant of Cain whose name is Lamech, and he boasts in his sin. It says, Lamech said to his wives Adah and Zillah, "Listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Pay attention to my words, for I have killed a man for wounding me and a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times." You see, there was a natural progression from Cain's single murder of his brother to Lamech, a descendant who by that time had come to the place where he committed murder and boasted with great pride about it. In other words, sin had gone from being something hidden, something shameful that had to be discovered, to now something that is boasted about, that is viewed as something honorable. If we go all the way through chapter 6 of Genesis, verse 5, it says, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of mankind was great on the earth, and that every intent on the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continuously." Chapter 11 shows the Tower of Babel. It says that mankind came together and decided to build a tower that would reach the heavens. Now, understand, this wasn't just a huge architectural achievement. This was an attempt to enter into the very presence of God and to assert themselves as equals with God himself. The natural progression of sin in human nature is to go from sin as something shameful to sin as something that we're proud of and boast about, to finally sin that corporately we establish as a way of life. In America today, we've lost our shame. We've moved to a place where we now have individuals who boast in their sin, but now we're entering the stage where we are making sin public policy. Well, how do we advance forward? Well, in the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament, Jesus had these words to say. In Matthew chapter 24, he says, "See to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will mislead many people. And you will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for these things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places, but all these things are merely the beginning of birth pains. Then they will hand you over to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. And at that time many will fall away, and they will betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will rise up and mislead many people. And because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will become cold. But the one who endures to the end is the one who will be saved." Let me tell you something. First of all, we have to remind ourselves that there's not anything new that's happening that's never happened before. Secondly, we have to remind ourselves that God is still in control. He has mapped out the direction of human history, and the machinations of these power-hungry people who consider themselves the elite, they are nothing more than tools in the hands of God to bring about His ultimate purposes. Why do I say that? Because the fact is, things could continue to get worse, barring a spiritual awakening that delays this progression for a time. And frankly, that's what we're praying for, and that's what we're working for. But barring a spiritual intervention of the Spirit of God in our culture, we will move in this direction where the love of people grows cold and people will hate those who stand on truth. But that's okay, because we have to read all the way to the end. And the end says that Jesus Christ and the people marked by His name, they will win. Let's not lose heart. Paul says, don't grow weary in doing good. We can't look at the culture around us and say, man, it's just going to hell in a handbasket. I'm going to dig a hole. I'm going to build a bunker. I'm just going to go into hiding. No, listen. Salt always has to be next to decay. Light always has to break into darkness. It's what we're here for. And we were born, not accidentally, to be the people of this generation. We are the soldiers of Jesus Christ. So don't lose heart. There's nothing here that is outside the control of God. There's nothing here that is going to frustrate the ultimate purposes of God. I want you to pick up your Bible and open it all the way to the end and see that the victory is just as sure today as it was 2,000 years ago when Jesus on the cross said, "It is finished. I've completed what I came here to do." There will be a second time when he comes, and it will be to finish what he came to do. Do not lose heart. We are losing in a very specific way that great American experiment, which has been a blessing to mankind. But it had to happen because original sin is always going to follow this progression. Sin was shameful, then it becomes something that we decide to be proud about, and eventually it becomes institutionalized. We are seeing the institutionalization of sin. But guess what? Institutions come and go. The kingdom of God is eternal. You are on the winning side of eternity. Don't lose heart. This is Truth Currents.